Pablo Escobar, or Pablo Emilio Escobar, is thought to be one of the most dangerous and wealthy criminals of the 20th century. His fortune was estimated at $47 billion. His power was considered almost limitless, and among the poor, the criminal had the respectful nickname Doctor. Despite the external charity which he showed, Escobar was a complete sadist and murderer who stopped at absolutely nothing to achieve his personal goals. Secret chronicles here. Watch till the end the story about the infamous Pablo Escobar and his deeds. From his young years, Pablo Escobar was a fairly ordinary child until he got involved with one of the small gangs and became addicted to cannabis. The poor neighborhoods of Medellin, where Pablo grew up, have always been a hotbed of crime, so it is not surprising, therefore, that Escobar himself soon engaged in criminal activities. At the very beginning, he simply stole tombstones from graves, polished the inscriptions, and then sold the cleaned obelisks to Panama. Later, Pablo Escobar started selling marijuana and counterfeiting lottery tickets. Afterwards, when he gained experience in small crimes, the young man put together his own group engaged in car theft. In addition to this, the owners of vehicles were initially asked to pay for the so-called protection against theft. If the driver did not agree, then soon his car disappeared forever. And Escobar's gang simply either quickly changed the license plates of the stolen vehicle or sold it for spare parts. Already in 1971, when Escobar's group gained experience and became influential enough, it took up a more profitable business: kidnapping for ransom. Of course, they did not kidnap the poor. So in the same 1971, one of the well-known and wealthy industrialists in Colombia, Diego Echevarrio, disappeared. Having failed to obtain a ransom from his relatives, Escobar's bandits, after several days of torture, simply strangled the unfortunate man and threw him into a junkyard. Interestingly, the poor part of the population took the death of the rich man with joy and immediately nicknamed Escobar El Doctor. The fact that, killing and robbing rich and wealthy citizens, Escobar always helped the poor, believing that they were suffering undeservedly, also played a role here. In fact, the criminal took on the role of the 20th century Robin Hood. Although despite such an outwardly positive halo, in fact, what Escobar was doing went beyond comprehension. Already at the age of 22, having become one of the most reputable criminals, Escobar began supplying cocaine to the United States. At first, he plainly bought it up and then started direct production. And he came to this thanks to endless wars with competitors. Representatives of other drug gangs were killed without any mercy, kidnapped and tortured by Escobar's gangsters. This soon had its effect. Pablo Escobar became almost the autocratic king of the cocaine industry in Colombia. In the United States, the potion was sent in all possible ways, including even delivery by submarines. Cocaine plantations and laboratories were set up in the jungle all over the country, and an army of assassins kept everything in place. Later, Escobar simply ensured the delivery of cargo to the states, taking a commission of 35% of the amount of delivery from the producers of cocaine. 6 years later, in 1977, teaming up with other drug traffickers, Pablo created the world's largest cocaine association, called the Medellin Cocaine Cartel. Taking advantage of unrealistic financial opportunities, Escobar actively bought government officials, police chiefs, and judges. At the same time, as part of maintaining the image of Robin Hood, Pablo built entire neighborhoods for the poor, which were simply called Pablo Escobar neighborhoods. But with all this, the atrocities of the drug lord exceeded literally all limits. After marrying a teenage girl, Escobar became very inflamed with love for the same teenage girls. Escobar's special people sought out young beauties in the poorest neighborhoods and then brought them to their chief to participate in specific parties. But the fate of the victims was not as rosy as it might seem at first glance. It wasn't until 1991 that the bodies of 24 girls who had been murdered after one of these parties were discovered. So the so-called Robin Hood was not this kind of character at the end of the day, especially since the numerous acts of intimidation carried out by the drug lord very often affected innocent people. So in 1984, the Minister of Justice, Rodrigo Larabonia, was shot, who put an end to Escobar's political ambitions, since he dreamed of becoming almost the president of Colombia, starting as a senator. Once the United States and Colombia agreed that all drug lords would be transferred to the United States for initial sentencing, Escobar staged a real terror for each colleague transferred. everyone who directly or indirectly supported the fight against drugs was killed, including people such as officials, journalists, police officers, and so on. Among the most notorious murders is the death of Supreme Court Justice Carlos Valencia on August 16, 1989, and just one day later, the death of politician Luis Carlos Galán. That same year, in 1989, Colombia's race brought dozens of dead and wounded people every day, all of whom Escobar considered a current or future problem. In Bogotá alone, 37 people were killed and at least 400 were injured and maimed in 2 weeks as a result of terrorist attacks by the Escobar drug cartel. And among these 400 people were those who had nothing to do with politics or drugs. Then followed November of 1989. November of 1989 was the peak of madness, when, on the orders of Escobar, a passenger plane was blown up, where the elected president of Colombia, César Gaviria Trujillo, was supposed to be. 107 innocent people were killed. Even more so, the president himself canceled the flight at the last moment, which is why he survived. Further acts of intimidation by the authorities only intensified the situation. Trying to destroy the head of the secret police, Miguel Maza Marquez, the militant staged an explosion on December 6th of 1989, which killed 62 people and injured more than 100 people. And once again, a lot of innocent people died. But, in all likelihood, those whom the drug lords so zealously protected more and more often became ordinary consumables. On January 30th, 1993, on the orders of Escobar, an act of intimidation was committed, which forced even many poor people to reconsider their attitude towards Pablo. The bomb killed 21 people. At least 7/10 more were injured. The horror of the situation was that majority of the victims were children and parents who came to the bookstore and in one split second were killed and crippled. It was after this terrorist act that local residents created the Los Pepes organization, whose members were those who themselves suffered from Escobar's actions or lost relatives. What's peculiar is that it was not law enforcement officers, but this association was the beginning of the end of Pablo Escobar's empire. Los Pepes burned down his mother's estate, attempted to kill the drug lord several times, and persecuted his family. Coupled with the massive operations of the Colombian government and the war started by a rival clan of drug traffickers, Escobar was, in a matter of fact, cornered. Many adherents of Escobar actions went over to competitors, some were imprisoned, and Pablo himself, having practically lost all his savings, was forced to hide. But on December 3rd of the same year, 1993, during an operation to capture drug lord Pablo Escobar, was killed. In defiance of the fact that many poor people wailed and wept at the funeral, most rejoiced that the madness of the Escobar era had come to an end. Suffice it to say that only in 1989, during the presidential elections in the same Medellin, over 2,500 people were killed in 1 year, and the city itself was under the full control of a drug dealer. The testimony of Popeye, John Jairo Velázquez, the best killer of Escobar, is also quite indicative. At the trial, he testified that he personally gave only orders for the murders of more than 3,000 people, while Velázquez himself confessed to 300 murders. For one example, when the mother of one of Pablo's friends got off the passenger bus, she got under the wheels. Despite the fact that the driver was not guilty, Escobar decided to console his friend by ordering the driver to be shot. And there were dozens, if not hundreds, of such cases of reprisals against absolutely random people. Hired killers of Escobar's army were also trained on targets, innocent citizens. Young guys from the poorest neighborhoods were first carefully prepared and then given the first exam. The graduate had to drive a motorcycle to the car and shoot the driver. Let us add that absolutely no one was interested in the identity of the driver. It was thanks to these schools in Colombia that a whole class of sicari appeared, children who were trained from almost a very early age for the role of hired killers. Naturally, when the drug lord's empire collapsed, such sicaris still continued to kill for other clients, just for the sake of making a living. Therefore, when a drug lord is made almost a standard of virtue and a fighter by the authorities, it is worth remembering the dead children, hundreds of wounded and killed bystanders, victims of a plane crash, and dozens of teenage girls, the bodies of many of whom have never been found till this very day. And as another confirmation that everyone was tired of Escobar and his bloody madness, the following fact can be a good example. The drug lord's brother, Roberto Escobar, worked for the National Anti-Drug Service, DEA. Escobar's son, Juan Sebastian Marroquin Santos, later wrote about this. My uncle Roberto Escobar was an official informant for the DEA and actively aided Pablo's enemies. And this was done not only by Roberto, but also by his brothers, sisters, and even his own mother. Leave a like, subscribe to this channel, and expect new episodes on Secret Chronicles. Until next time.